Hi guys, before we start chapter number 10, let's recall what we read in chapter number 9. Iron tools and agriculture. The use of iron began in the subcontinent about 3000 years ago. Some of the largest collections of iron tools and weapons were found in the megalithic burials. Around 2500 years ago, there is evidence for the growing use of iron tools. These included axes for clearing forest and the iron plowshare. So, irrigation works that were built during this time included canals, wells, tanks, and artificial lakes. In the Tamil region, large landowners were known as Velalar, ordinary ploughmen were known as Uzavar, and landless labourers, including slaves, were known as Kadeshyar and Adimai. In the northern part of the country, the village headman was known as the Grama Bhojaka. Usually, men from the same family held the position for generations. In other words, the post was hereditary. The Grama Bhojaka was often the largest landowner. Generally, he had slaves and hired workers to cultivate the land. Besides, as he was powerful, the king often used him to collect taxes from the village. He also functioned as a judge and sometimes as a policeman. Apart from the Grama Bhojaka, there were other independent farmers known as Grihapatis, most of whom were smaller landowners, and then there were men and women such as the Dasa Karmakara. Then let's hear about the Sangam literature. It was composed around 2300 years ago. These texts were called Sangam because they were supposed to have been composed and compiled in assemblies known as Sangams of poets that were held in the city of Madurai. The Tamil term mentioned above are found in Sangam literature. Now let's see about Jatakas. These were stories that were probably composed by ordinary people and then written down and preserved by Buddhist monks. In many cities, archaeologists have found rows of pots or ceramic rings arranged one on top of the other. These are known as ring wells. These seem to have been used as toilets in some cases and as drains and garbage dumps. These ring wells are usually found in individual houses. Another way of finding out about early cities is from the accounts of sailors and travelers who visited them. One of the most detailed accounts that has been found was by an unknown Greek sailor. The earliest coins which were in use for about 500 years were punch-marked coins. They have been given this name because the designs were punched onto the metal, and they are made of silver or copper. Mathura has been an important settlement for more than 2500 years. It was important because it was located at the crossroads of two major routes of travel and trade, from the northwest to the east and from north to south. There were fortifications around the city and several shrines. Farmers and herders from adjoining areas provided food for people in the city. Mathura was also a center where some extremely fine sculpture was produced. Around 2000 years ago, Mathura became the second capital of the Kushanas. About okay. Mathura was also a religious center. There were Buddhist monasteries, Jain shrines, and it was an important center for the worship of Krishna. Uh, and they use extremely fine pottery known as northern black polished ware. Text Okay, the manufacture of clothes was important. There were famous centers such as Varanasi in the north and Madurai in the south. Both men and women worked in these centers. Many craftspersons and merchants now formed associations known as shrenis. These shrenis of craftspersons provided training, procured raw material, and distributed the finished products. Then, shrenis of merchants organized the trade. Shrenis also served as banks where rich men and women deposited money. This was invested and part of the interest was returned or used to support religious institutions such as monasteries. So Arikamedu is in Pondicherry. Between 2200 and 1900 years ago, Arikamedu was a coastal settlement where ships unloaded goods from distant land. A massive brick structure, which may have been a warehouse, was found at the site. Other finds include pottery from the Mediterranean region, such as amphorae, tall, double handled jars that contained liquids such as wine or oil, and stamped red glazed pottery known as Aretinware, which was named after a city in Italy. Augustus was one of the most important emperors who ruled about 2000 years ago. Said that he found Rome a city of brick and made it into a city of marble. Okay, that's all from chapter number 9. So let's start chapter number 10. So, chapter number 10, Traders, Kings, and Pilgrims. Jogini at the market. Jogini looked forward to the fair in the village. She loved to see and touch the pots and pans of shiny steel, bright plastic buckets, cloth printed with brilliant floral designs, and clockwork toys, all of which came from the city. The men who spread out their wares came in buses and trucks and went back at the end of the day. Why were they always on the move? She wondered. Her mother explained that they were traders, people who bought things where they were made and sold them elsewhere. So let's find out how to find out about trade and traders. You read about the northern black polish ware in chapter 9. This fine pottery, especially bowls and plates, were found from several archaeological sites throughout the subcontinent. How do you think it reached these places? Traders may have been carried Traders may have carried them from the places where they were made to sell them at other places. So the traders carried them. South India was famous for gold, spices, especially pepper, and precious stones. Pepper was particularly valued in the Roman Empire. so much so that it was known as black gold. So traders carried many of these goods to Rome in ships across the sea and by land in caravans. There must have been quite a lot of trade, as many Roman gold coins have been found in South India. Can you think of how and why these reached India? A poem about trade. We can find evidence of trade in the Sangam poems. Here is one of which describes the goods brought into Puhar, an important port on the east coast. Here are brought swift, prancing horses by sea in ships, bales of black pepper in carts, gems and gold born in the Himalayas, sandalwood born in the western hills, the pearls of the southern seas, and corals from the eastern oceans, the yield of the Ganga and the crops from the Kaveri, foodstuffs from Sri Lanka, pottery from Myanmar, and other rare and rich imports. Make a list of all the things that are mentioned. What would they be used for? Traders explored several sea routes. Some of these followed the coast. There were others across the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, where sailors took advantage of the monsoon winds to cross the seas more quickly. So, if they wanted to reach the western coast of the subcontinent from East Africa or Arabia, they chose to sail with the southwest monsoon. And sturdy ships had to be built for these long journeys. New kingdoms along the coast. The southern half of the subcontinent is marked by a long coastline with hills, plateaus, and river valleys. Amongst the river valleys, that of the Kaveri is the most fertile. Chiefs and kings who controlled the river valleys and the coast became rich and powerful. Sangam poems mention the Movendar. So they mentioned Movendar. This is a Tamil word meaning three chiefs, used for the heads of three ruling families. The Cholas, Cheras, and the Pandyas, who became powerful in South India around 2300 years ago. Each of the three chiefs had two centers of power, one inland and one on the coast. Of these 6 cities, 2 were very important: Puhar or Kaveripatnam, the port of the Cholas, and Madurai, the capital of the Pandyas. Okay, so Sangam poems mention the Movendar. This is the Tamil word meaning three chiefs, used for the heads of three ruling families: the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas, who became powerful in South India around 2300 years ago. Each of the three chiefs had two centers of power, one inland and one on the coast. Of these 6 cities, 2 were very important: Puhar or Kaveripatnam, the port of the Cholas, and Madurai, the capital of the Pandyas. The chiefs did not collect regular taxes. Instead, they demanded and received gifts from the people. They also went on military expeditions and collect tribute from neighboring areas. They kept some of the wealth and distributed the rest amongst their supporters, including members of their family, soldiers, and poets. Many poets whose compositions are found in the Sangam collection composed poems in praise of chiefs who often rewarded them with precious stones, gold, horses, elephants, chariots, and fine cloth. Around 200 years later, a dynasty known as the Satavahanas became powerful in western India. The most important ruler of the Satavahanas was Gautamiputra Sri Katakarni. We know about him from an inscription composed by his mother, Gautami Balashri. He and other Satavahana rulers were known as lords of the Dakshinapath, literally the road leading to the south, which was also used as a name for the entire south region. He sent his army to the eastern, western, and southern coast. Around 200 years later, a dynasty known as the Satavahanas became powerful in western India. The most important ruler of the Satavahanas was Gautamiputra Sri Satakarni. We know about him from an inscription composed by his mother, Gautami Balashri. He and other Satavahana rulers were known as lords of the Dakshinapath, literally the route leading to the south, which was also used as a name for the entire southern region. He sent his army to the eastern, western, and southern coast. Why do you think he wanted to control the coast? The story of the Silk Route. The rich, glossy colors of silk, as well as its smooth texture, make it a highly valued fabric in most societies. Making silk is a complicated process. Raw silk has to be extracted from the cocoons of silkworms, spun into thread, and then woven into cloth. Techniques of making silk were first invented in China around 7,000 years ago. While the methods remained a closely guarded secret for thousands of years, some people from China who went to distant lands on foot, horseback, and on camels carried silk with them. The paths they followed came to be known as the Silk Route. The rich, glossy colors of silk, as well as its smooth texture, make it a highly valued fabric in most societies. Making silk is a complicated process. Raw silk has to be extracted from the cocoons of silkworms, spun into thread, and then woven into cloth. Techniques of making silk were first invented in China around 7,000 years ago. While the methods remained a closely guarded secret for thousands of years, some people from China who went to distant lands on foot, horseback, and on camels carried silk with them. The paths they followed came to be known as the Silk Route. Sometimes Chinese rulers sent gifts of silk to rulers in Iran and West Asia, and from there the knowledge of silk spread further west. Around about 2000 years ago, wearing silk became about 2000 years ago, wearing silk became the fashion amongst rulers and rich people in Rome. It was very expensive and it had to be brought all the way from China along dangerous routes through mountains and deserts. People living along the route often demanded payments for allowing traders to pass through. Look at map 6, which shows the Silk Route and its branches. Some kings tried to control large portions of the route. This was because they could benefit from taxes, tributes, and gifts that were brought by traders traveling along the route. In return, they often protected the traders who passed through their kingdoms from attacks by robbers. The best known of the rulers who controlled the Silk Route were the Kushanas, who ruled over Central Asia and northwest India around 2000 years ago. Their two major centers of power were Peshawar and Mathura. Taxila was also included in their kingdom. During their rule, a branch of the Silk Route extended from Central Asia down to the seaports at the mouth of the river Indus, from where silk was shipped westwards to the Roman Empire. The Kushanas were amongst the earliest rulers of the subcontinent to issue gold coins. These were used by traders along the Silk Route. A sculpture from the stupa at Sanchi. Look at the tree and the empty seat below it. Sculptors carved this to indicate that the Buddha had attained enlightenment while meditating under the tree. Okay. Why do you think it would have been difficult to use carts along the sea route? Silk was also sent from China by sea. Trace the routes on map 6. What do you think would have been the advantages and problems in transporting silk by sea? The spread of Buddhism. The most famous Kusana rulers was Kanishka, who ruled around 1900 years ago. He organized Buddhist council where scholars met and discussed important matters. Ashvaghosha, a poet who composed a biography of the Buddha Charita, lived in his court. Ashvaghosha and other Buddhist scholars now began writing in Sanskrit. A new form of Buddhism, known as Mahayana Buddhism, now developed. These had two distinct features. Earlier, the Buddha's presence was shown in sculpture by using certain signs. For instance, his attainment of enlightenment was shown by sculptures of the peepal tree. Now, statues of the Buddha were made. Many of these were made in Mathura, while others were made in Takshila. The second change was a belief in Bodhisattvas. These were supposed to be persons who had attained enlightenment. Once they attained enlightenment, they could live in complete isolation and meditate in peace. However, instead of doing that, they remained in the world to teach and help other people. The worship of Bodhisattvas became very popular and spread throughout Central Asia, China, and later to Korea and Japan. Below left an image of Buddha from Mathura. Right, an image of Buddha from Takshila. Look at these and note the similarities and differences that you may find. Buddhism also spread to western and southern India, where dozens of caves were hollowed out of hills for monks to live in. Some of these caves were made on the orders of kings and queens, others by merchants and farmers. These were often located near passes through the Western Ghats. Roads connecting prosperous ports on the coast with cities in the Deccan ran through these passes. Roads connecting prosperous ports on the coast with cities in the Deccan ran through these passes. Traders probably halted in these cave monasteries during their travels. Buddhism also spread Buddhism also spread southeastwards to Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, and other parts of Southeast Asia, including Indonesia. The older form of Buddhism, known as Theravada Buddhism, was more popular in these areas. A cave at Karle, Maharashtra. Read page 100 once more. Can you think of how Buddhism spread to these lands? The quest of the pilgrims. As traders journeyed to distant lands in caravans and ships, pilgrims often traveled with them. Pilgrims. So, who are these pilgrims? They are men and women who undertake journeys to holy places in order to offer prayers or in order to offer worship. The best known of these are the Chinese Buddhist pilgrims. Fashion, who came to the subcontinent about 1600 years ago. Zhuanzhang, who came around 1400 years ago, and I Qing, who came about 50 years after Zhuanzhang. They came to visit places associated with the life of the Buddha as well as famous monasteries. The best known of these are the Chinese Buddhist pilgrims, Fajian, who came to the subcontinent about 1600 years ago, Xuanzang, who came around 1400 years ago, and I Qing, who came about 50 years after Xuanzang. They came to visit places associated with the life of the Buddha as well as famous monasteries. Each of these pilgrims left an account of his journey. They wrote of the dangers they encountered on their travels, which often took years, of the countries and the monasteries that they visited, and the books they carried back with them. How Fajian returned to China. Fajian began his journey back home from Bengal. He boarded a ship belonging to some merchants. They had barely traveled for 2 days when they were caught in a storm. The merchants began throwing their merchandise overboard so as to lighten the load and save the ship from sinking. Fajian threw away his meager personal belongings but clung to his books and the statues of the Buddha that he had collected. Finally, the storm subsided after 13 days. This is how he describes the sea. The sea itself is boundless in extent. It is impossible to know east or west, except by observing the sun, moon, or stars in their motions. If it is dark, rainy weather, the only plan is to steer by the wind. It took him more than 90 days to reach Java, where he halted for 5 months before boarding another merchant ship that took him to China. Try and trace the route Fajian took on map 6. Why do you think he did not want to throw away his books and statues? Xuanzang, who took the land route, back to China through the northwest and Central Asia, carried back with him statues of the Buddha made of gold, silver, and sandalwood, and over 600 manuscripts loaded on the backs of 20 horses. Over 50 manuscripts were lost when the boat on which he was crossing the Indus capsized. He spent the rest of his life translating the remaining manuscripts from Sanskrit into Chinese. Now let's see about Nalanda, a unique center of Buddhist learning. Xuanzang and other pilgrims spent time studying in Nalanda, Bihar, the most famous Buddhist monasteries of the period. This is how he describes it. Xuanzang and other pilgrims spent time studying in Nalanda, Bihar, the most famous Buddhist monastery of the period. This is how he describes it. The teachers are men of the highest ability and talent. They follow the teachings of the Buddha in all sincerity. The rules of the monastery are strict and everyone has to follow them. Discussions are held throughout the day and the old and the young mutually help one another. Learned men from different cities come here to settle their doubts. The gatekeeper asks new entrants difficult questions. They are allowed to enter only after they have been able to answer these. 7 or 8 out of every 10 are not able to answer. List the reasons why Xuanzang wanted to study in Nalanda. The beginning of Bhakti. This was also the time when the worship of certain deities, which became a central feature of later Buddhism, of later Hinduism, gained in importance. These deities include Shiva, Vishnu, and goddesses such as Durga. Vishnu as Varaha, an image from Iran, Madhya Pradesh. This magnificent statue is a special form of Vishnu, the Varaha or boar. According to the Puranas, Vishnu took the shape of a boar in order to rescue the earth, which had sunk into water. Here the earth is shown as a woman. Okay. These deities were worshipped through bhakti, an idea that became very popular at this time. Bhakti is generally understood as a person's devotion to his or her chosen deity. Anybody, whether rich or poor, belonging to the so-called high or low caste, men or women, could follow the path of bhakti. The idea of bhakti is present in the Bhagavad-Gita. Is present in the Bhagavad-Gita, a sacred book of the Hindus, which is included in the Mahabharata. In this, Krishna, the god, asked Arjun, his devotee and friend, to abandon all dharmas and take refuge in him, as only he can set Arjuna free from every evil. This form of worship gradually spread to different parts of the country. Okay, now let's see what this bhakti is. These deities were worshipped through bhakti, an idea that became very popular at this time. Bhakti is generally understood as a person's devotion to his or her chosen deity. Anybody, whether rich or poor, belonging to the so-called high or low caste, man or women, could follow the path of bhakti. The idea of bhakti is present in the Bhagavad-Gita, a sacred book of the Hindus, which is included in the Mahabharata. In this, Krishna the god asked Arjuna, his devotee and friend, to abandon all dharmas and take refuge in him, as only he can set Arjuna free from every evil. This form of worship gradually spread to different parts of the country. Those who followed the system of bhakti emphasized devotion and individual worship of a god or goddesses rather than the performance of elaborate sacrifices. According to this system of belief, if a devotee worships the chosen deity with a pure heart, the deity will appear in the form in which he or she may desire. So the deity could be thought of as a human being, lion, tree, or any other form. Once this idea gained acceptance, artists made beautiful images of these deities. Bhakti. It comes from the Sanskrit word bhaj, meaning to divide or share. This suggests an intimate two-way relationship between the deity and the devotee. Bhakti is directed towards Bhagavat, who is often translated as God, but also means one who possesses and shares bhaga, literally good fortune or bliss. The devotee, known as the Bhakt or the Bhagavata, shares his or her chosen deity's bhaga. A poem by a Bhakt. Most bhakti literature tells us that riches, learning, and high status do not automatically ensure a close relationship with the deity. This is part of a poem composed in Tamil by Appar, a devotee of Shiva who lived about 1400 years ago. Appar was a Velala, the leper with rotting limbs, the man who is regarded as low by the Brahmin, even the scavenger. Even this man, if they are servants, that is devotees, of him who shelters the Ganga in his long hair, that is Shiva, I worship them. They are gods to me. What does the poet regard as more valuable, social status or devotion? Because the deities were special, these images of the deity were often placed within special homes, places that we describe as temples. You will learn more about these temples in chapter 12. Bhakti inspired some of the best expressions in art, sculpture, poetry, and architecture. Hindu. The word Hindu, like the term India, is derived from the river Indus. It was used by Arabs and Iranians to refer to people who lived to the east of the river and to their cultural practices, including religious beliefs. So, what's happening elsewhere in the world? About 2000 years ago, Christianity emerged. About 2000 years ago, Christianity emerged in West Asia. Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem, which was then part of the Roman Empire. Christ's teachings were that he was the savior of the world. He also taught people to treat others with love, and trust others, just as they themselves wanted to be treated. Here are a few verses from the Bible, the holy book that contains the teachings of Christ. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Christ's teachings appealed to ordinary people and spread through West Asia, Africa, and Europe. The first Christian preachers came from West Asia to the west coast of the subcontinent within 100 years of Christ's death. Look at map 6 and trace out the route that they may have used. The Christians of Kerala, known as Syrian Christians because they probably came from West Asia, are amongst the oldest Christian communities in the world. Imagine you have a manuscript which a Chinese pilgrim would like to carry back with him. Describe your conversation. Keywords: trader, movendar, root, silk, Kushanas, Mahayana, Buddhism, Theravada, Buddhism, Bodhisattva, Pilgrim, Bhakti. Let's do match the following. Movendar, Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas. Lords of the Dakshinapath, Satavahana rulers. Ashvaghosha, author of Buddhacharita. Bodhisattvas, Mahayana Buddhism. Xuanzang, Chinese pilgrim. Some important dates. Discovery of silk making about 7,000 years ago. The Cheras, Cholas and Pandyas about 2,300 years ago. Growing demand for silk in the Roman Empire about 2,000 years ago. Kanishka, the Kushana rulers about 1,900 years ago. Faxian comes to India about 1,600 years ago. Xuanzang comes to India. Apar composes devotional poems in praise of Shiva about 1,400 years ago. And that's all. Thank you everyone. Let's see you guys in my next video. Thank you. Bye.